I'm going to go ahead and ask Brendan to start recording. Thank you, Brendan. And then we'll dive right in. So a couple of logistics for the meeting. We will be recording this webinar. If you have any colleagues that aren't able to attend or any partners in the community who aren't able to attend, we'll send out the recording as well as the PowerPoint after the meeting. In terms of questions, please feel free to type any questions into the chat. Lauren Whitley is going to be monitoring the chat. So Lauren, if you see anything pressing, please bring it up to me. Otherwise, we'll have a time for Q&A at the end. Right now, everyone is muted, but we will unmute folks, allow you to unmute yourself once we get to the Q&A, and we will go through questions at that time. But in the meantime, please type in questions as they come up. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be reviewing the logistics for the sheltered point in time count for 2021. And we will also have Brendan go over the point in time count app. Some of you have used the app in previous years. It's still optional, but we want to make sure we walk through the app for folks who may have been interested in using it, but want a little bit more info on it. We will also be talking through some COVID-19 safety considerations. HUD has published some guidance on conducting the point in time count in light of COVID-19, so we'll go over some of that as well. Alrighty, so many of you already have participated in the point in time count before, but for some folks this is new and also a refresher. So basically the point in time count is a census count of all the persons in your CoC who are experiencing homelessness on a single night, a single point in time. And it typically includes demographic information, as well as different characteristics about the people in the program. And we'll go into what the point in time count survey entails. HUD does require the point in time count every year, so that's why we're here. And it involves three different components. The first is the housing inventory count. That's a picture of all of the beds and units that you have in your community to serve people experiencing homelessness. The second is the sheltered point in time count, which is what we're talking about today. We're talking about the housing inventory count and the sheltered point in time count. The sheltered point in time count is that snapshot of all the persons and households at a single point in time who are experiencing homelessness in emergency shelter and transitional housing. And then the third component is the unsheltered point in time count. So this year is a little bit different for the unsheltered point in time count due to COVID-19 considerations. HUD has given CoCs the opportunity to basically amend their procedure for the unsheltered point in time count to ensure safety. So the East and the West are doing things a little bit differently. If you would like more information about what's going on in your county, every county has an unsheltered point in time count coordinator. And at the end, you'll see our email address, the PA Homeless Count email address. If you're not sure who the coordinator is for your county, but you want to know more about what's going on with the unsheltered point in time count, you can email us and we'll connect you with that person. But we're not going over unsheltered stuff today, just the sheltered point in time count. So the folks who are counted in the sheltered point in time count include all the persons who are in emergency shelter, and that includes any configuration of emergency shelter. That could be you have a building that is a shelter in your community. It could be hotel and motel vouchers. It could be a domestic violence shelter, or it could be sort of a scattered site shelter. For example, we know there's some like church shelters where folks may move to different locations. So all of those are included in the shelter point in time count. We also include transitional housing programs and safe havens. However, safe havens, we basically don't have any more safe havens in existence in the East and West anymore. So we will not be talking about that. We will be talking about what to do if you're a shelter who's had to change your configuration due to COVID-19 and how that's going to work. And we'll get into that in a future slide. So the point in time count is conducted in the last 10 days in January. That's a program regulation. We have to do the count in the last 10 days of January. So this year, the Eastern and Western PA CoC point in time count will be on Wednesday, January 27th. What that means is we're counting anyone who was homeless on the night of January 27th to the morning of January 28th. So essentially, if you're looking at the evening, late evening hours of Wednesday, January 27th to the morning of January 28th, where was someone sleeping on that night? And we're capturing anyone who is experiencing homelessness. Alrighty, and we want to go over the timeline, and then we're going to go into the logistics. So right now we're having our sheltered point in time count webinar where we go over all the logistics. Throughout December and January, we're going to be confirming all of the sheltered programs and your point in time contact. So every program, we're going to ask you for a contact. Who is the person who we will reach out to gather the information we need for the PIT count? Some programs have 2 different people, 1 or 2 different people, and that's fine. Most of you have probably already heard from someone. You've either heard from Lauren Whitley in the East, Sierra Carnes in the West, or myself through our PA homeless count. So if you haven't heard from us, that probably means we don't have your correct contact information for your program. Please reach out to us at the end of the webinar. We'll have our email address. If you haven't heard from anyone from DMA, Lauren, Sierra, or myself, we definitely want to make sure we have the correct contact information for your program. So during January, if you are HMIS participating sheltered program, we will be reviewing your data to determine if we can use your data for the point in time count. More on that in a minute. And then obviously our point in time count date is January 27th. By February 17th, all your data will be due to DMA. So that's 2 components. If you're an emergency shelter transitional housing program, you'll need to submit your PIT interview forms, which we'll talk about, and all the programs, shelters, transitional housing, rapid, permanent supportive housing, and other permanent housing have to do an online survey that goes over your housing inventory. We're going to talk through all of that. In February and March, you may hear from us because we basically are checking all your data, cleaning it up, checking for duplicates. If anything is kind of weird or we don't understand it, we reach out to verify that with you. You may hear from us with questions. And then in March, we submit all the data to HUD, March and April. And then in May, we distribute county level PIT reports. Some of you end up needing that data for various reporting. So we send out the data that's broken out by the county level. All right, so we're going to talk through the 2 components of the PIT count, the housing inventory count, and the actual point in time count. So just as a reminder, the HIC, which is what we call the housing inventory count, looks at beds and units. So how many beds and how many units do we have in the CoC to serve people experiencing homelessness? And then the point in time count is how many people. So HIC is beds and units, and PIT is how many people and households. We know we have a lot of acronyms, so if I throw out an acronym and I don't define it, please call me out in the chat and I will define it. So the housing inventory count, this is every program in the CoC that is dedicated to serving people experiencing homelessness. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute, when to include programs on the HIC. So this includes all emergency shelters. That includes domestic violence shelters, hotel motel vouchers. It includes Code Blue, cold weather shelters. And we'll talk a little bit about if you have resources in your community that are specifically for COVID-19 for people experiencing homelessness, we'll talk about that. All your transitional housing, all your rapid rehousing, all your permanent supportive housing, and then there's this category called other permanent housing. If you're in other permanent housing program, you probably know it, but basically you're a permanent housing program that typically doesn't require a disability to be in the program such as PSH, but you're still dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. If you're one of those programs, you probably know that already. So this is just a snapshot of what we have to submit to HUD. It's a lot of columns, way more than this. This is just a snapshot. So basically we need every program's name. We need what's called a geocode, which is basically coded to your county. If your county has like a major city in it, then they need to know, this person was counted in, Allentown, for example. Whether your program's HMIS participating, how many beds and units you have in your program, and whether those are for single folks, whether those are for families, whether any of them are veteran dedicated, whether any of them are youth dedicated, if you have seasonal beds that are only available during the winter time, as well as other things such as funding source. So you will get a survey, and we'll talk about this in a minute, that asks you all of these questions. So if you're walking through the survey thinking, why do you need to know all of this stuff? It's because these are all the required elements that we have to report to HUD. So if you're on this call and you're not sure if your program should actually be counted in the HIC, there's a couple of factors that HUD uses to define whether a program should be included on the HIC. So the HIC is for programs that are dedicated to serving households experiencing homelessness. And the purpose, or if you're a permanent housing project, the people who came into your program were homeless at entry. So there's kind of three tests that HUD uses. One, the primary intent of your program is to serve people experiencing homelessness. Two, the project verifies homeless status as part of eligibility. Some programs may use self-report, which is acceptable to HUD, or you may verify it in some other way. But you do ask people what their housing status is, and the actual project clients are predominantly homeless. If you have a program that serves maybe 10 beds for people experiencing homelessness and 10 other beds, like maybe they're county funded for mental health or whatever, we're really only counting the beds that are homeless dedicated. So if you have a bed in an institutional setting that's not specifically dedicated for people experiencing homelessness, for example, detox facilities, emergency rooms, jails, acute crisis centers, those should not be included on the HIC if they're not dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. If you have an interesting scenario in your county, please reach out and we will talk through it with you. We have some interesting project setups and we can figure that out with you. So the HIC data collection tool, I mentioned everyone would get a survey. Every single program has to complete the survey. If you're an agency that has 5 programs, you have to complete 5 surveys. So every project that you have that's dedicated to people experiencing homelessness, you have to complete a survey. So the week of the pit count, we send out the link to the survey, and all emergency shelter, transitional housing, rapid, PSH, other permanent housing must complete the survey. Even if your program is in HMIS, we have to verify your information every year. So what the survey asks you for is what your program capacity is. So how many units do you have and how many beds, what the configuration of the units is. So for example, site-based, scattered site, hotel, motel, talk about that in a minute. If your program has had to change due to COVID, funding source, and also how many people were in your program the night of the pit count. So you really can't do this survey until after January 27th has passed, because you'll need to report out how many folks were in your program the night of January 27th. So you'll have from January 27th to February 17th to do that online survey. So some of the things that are interesting this year due to COVID-19 that we wanted to talk through, and this is guidance from HUD. So there's some communities that are questioning whether the program should be included on the HIC because it's part of your COVID-19 response inventory, your infectious disease inventory. So if you have inventory in your community that's basically just been set up due to COVID-19, consider if it's dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. If so, it should be included on the HIC. If it partially is dedicated to people experiencing homelessness, so for example, 10 beds are for people experiencing homelessness, 10 beds are for some other purpose, due to COVID-19, you should only report on the beds and the people in those beds that are dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. So there is a question on the HIC about project type. So it asks if your project is site-based, so like you're in a physical building, scattered site, meaning maybe you house people at different locations in the community. I know some of our like family promise shelters do that setup where maybe folks are in different congregations, or if you're hotel motel. If you're an emergency shelter that has a facility, you're a site-based program, but you put some folks in hotel motel due to COVID-19, maybe for social distancing purposes, you do not need to recategorize those beds. You don't need to say, well, I have 10 shelter beds. Normally we have 10, but 5 of those are now in hotel motel. You will count your whole inventory just as site-based. This is the direction from HUD, basically trying to make it a little bit easier and not as complicated. So again, if you're a site-based shelter that has transitioned some beds to hotel motel temporarily due to COVID-19, you will still report those beds as usual as part of your site-based inventory. All these instructions will be in the survey, and you can always reach out to us too. A couple other considerations. If your shelter took beds offline during a certain period of time, during January, you have some beds offline in order to physically distance, you should adjust your inventory down. So if you have beds that are not operating during the point in time count date, you should not count those. So normally you have 20 beds, but you had to take 10 beds offline. Those beds are not operational the night of the pit count. You should only be counting 10 beds. That is the direction we've gotten from HUD. What if we have more beds since we are hoteling, moteling? Same concept, your inventory would increase. So if you normally have 20 beds, but you added 10 beds in hotel motel, you would increase your inventory. The difference and kind of the tricky part is if you have a program in your community that's only hotel motel, we do have those, continue to count it as hotel motel. It's a specific project that you have in your community, you will count that as hotel motel. But if you're a site-based shelter and you've increased or decreased your inventory due to COVID-19, you should count what your actual inventory is on the night of the pit count. Yes, to Keisha's question, which is exactly what we're talking about, they have half in the shelter and the other half in a motel. You would count your beds as usual as your site-based inventory, adding up the number of beds you have operational in the site-based shelter and the number of beds you have in the hotel motel. We know it's a little bit different this year. So again, if you run into questions about your project, just reach out anytime. If there are any programs in your county that are new, they weren't on January 2020 HIC for people experiencing homelessness, please let us know. We're doing our best to capture all of those. For example, we're looking at all the programs that got ESG funds this year, all the programs that got ESG CV funds this year, and adding those to the list. But if you're like, this is a new program and I'm not sure if you're capturing it, please let us know. We do rely heavily on you all to make sure that the inventory is correct. All right, so again, we talked about the HIC. The HIC, the housing inventory count, is done by all programs: shelter, transitional housing, rapid, permanent supportive housing, and other permanent housing. Every single program does a HIC survey. We're going to move on to the sheltered point in time count. Remember, the sheltered point in time count is people and households. So how many actual people did you have in your program the night of the pit count? The point in time count only applies to people who are homeless on the night of the count. So people in shelter and transitional housing. We don't count the pit number for those rapid, permanent supportive housing and other permanent housing, because those folks are housed. Those folks are permanently housed. So they're not considered homeless the night of the count. We capture how many beds we have for folks, but in terms of who was homeless the night of the count, we're just counting folks in shelter and folks in transitional housing. All right, I see questions coming through, but I'm going to keep going, and Lauren interrupts me if anything comes up, or feel free to respond. So the PIT data source, there's 3 possible data sources you can potentially use to submit your data for the point in time count. So the point in time count is a survey that's done with every person in your program, and it's 1 survey per household. So if you have a household with 5 people, you do the survey for those 5 people. And we'll get into that in a bit. So there's 3 possible data sources. One is HMIS. If your project, your shelter or transitional housing participates in HMIS, we would love to use your HMIS data for the PIT. It's more streamlined, it's easier on you. We'll talk about when we can use it. Your data must be clean, it must be accurate. So we will get into that in a minute. The other options are paper interview forms. Many of you are familiar with those. It's a couple page form that goes through all the questions you need to answer. The other option is the mobile app. The paper interview forms in the mobile app are identical. They're the same. It's just a different method. If you prefer to do your surveys on paper, great. If not, you can enter your surveys in the mobile app, and Brendan's going to talk about that at the end of the webinar. So if you are an HMIS participating program, you will be notified in advance of the PIT count if your data quality passes the pretest. And we'll get into that in a second. So if your data quality is good, great. You don't have to do any paper surveys or mobile app. We pull your HMIS data and we're good to go. If you don't pass the pretest, then you have to collect the survey forms. And it's up to your program what will work best. If you would rather use the paper surveys or the mobile app, we would just ask that you use a consistent form. So if you're going to use paper surveys, use paper surveys. If you're going to use the mobile app, use the mobile app. It is very complicated on the data cleanup side to try to reconcile paper forms and mobile apps. Sometimes you might count someone twice on accident. Please pick the one that will work best for your program. I personally like the mobile app. You can log onto a computer and do it right in your browser, or you can do it on a phone, whatever is more convenient for you. And I've worked with Brendan on it, and we try to make it like as streamlined as possible. So if you're one of those HMIS participating programs, if you're an HMIS participating emergency shelter or transitional housing program, we need to know that your data is accurate in order to use your data for the PIT count. So we will review your data. Usually we do this in early January to check whether it passes a data quality threshold. So what we're looking for is you're entering and exiting people on a regular basis. If your data hasn't been touched in 6 months or 9 months, odds are it's not accurate because you probably don't have people in your program that have been there for 9 months. Maybe if you're a transitional housing program, and if that's the case, we'll reach out to you. Your program enrollment should roughly align with your program inventory. So if you have 50 beds, but you have 100 people in HMIS, that raises an alarm bell that maybe folks aren't being exited from the program on a regular basis. And if your program does have good data quality, we'll use your HMIS data and you don't have to do any survey forms. You can start working on this now. It saves you tons of time if you're in HMIS for us to just use your HMIS data. You don't have to survey anyone. It's easy, but we rely on you. You can start doing this now. Look at your census in HMIS, pull some reports. Is this accurate? Oh, this person exited 3 months ago. I need to exit them. You need to make sure it's updated. So your census on the night of January 27th should be exactly who was in the program that night, and your HMIS should match, the actual people. So if you're wondering about that, please start working on that now. It makes your life a little bit easier come next month. A couple of COVID-19 considerations for the sheltered PIT count. You should be working within your program to figure out how to safely collect data for your program participants. You all are well versed in this at this point. You have to do intakes for folks, you have to do referrals for folks, and you have to interact with folks on a daily basis. So hopefully this isn't new or different, but HUD is really emphasizing that CoC should be ensuring that you're doing this in a socially distanced way, that you have PPE or masks, that you potentially could use the mobile app if that will allow more distance, that sort of thing. So one consideration though for the mobile app, if your program is using it, your staff need to be the ones filling it out as you interview participants. So I'm surveying for my program and I'm entering 10 surveys for all the 10 people in the program, and I'm asking them this information. You really do need to survey folks because some of the information you may not have collected at intake, for example. Please don't give the link out to participants to fill out on their own. That's part of our data validity, is making sure that the information is entered by program staff. If you're a program that's providing hotel motel vouchers and your participants aren't physically there for you to survey, you need to be thinking about a plan for collecting data from those participants, whether it's over the phone or virtually or whatever makes sense. You need to make sure you have a plan in place for how you're going to collect that data. So the information that we collect in the sheltered point in time count is we want to know how many people are in the household. So for example, 2 adults, 2 children, you're going to collect data for those 4 people. 1 adult, collect data for that 1 person. For each person in the household, you collect demographic information. So age, gender, ethnicity, and race. These are all HUD required fields. We also collect additional data. So there's a few questions about how long the person's been homeless and the number of homeless episodes. That data is required because that helps us determine how many folks in the CoC are chronically homeless. So that's why that question is included. Domestic violence, there is a screening question. We'll go to this on the next slide about domestic violence, whether someone is fleeing domestic violence, and if so, making sure they're connected with resources and asking whether they feel comfortable proceeding with the rest of the survey. We'll talk about that in a minute. We ask about disability information and veteran status. And these are all HUD required data elements because at the aggregate level, meaning once we combine all the data, HUD wants to know how many people in your CoC who were homeless were veterans. How many people had a disabling condition? How many people were youth? How many people were fleeing DV? That sort of thing. So we mentioned the domestic violence question. So with the domestic violence question, we ask that if you're surveying 2 adults, that you do not ask these questions in front of 2 adults together. It could potentially be a safety concern. So if you're interviewing 2 adults together, skip over this section for safety reasons. So the questions asked are, did you need to leave the place you were last staying due to someone making you feel unsafe, and do you feel unable to return because you feel unsafe? Yes or no. If the person says that they left because they're feeling unsafe, you can offer to refer that person to the domestic violence hotline. And if they're feeling unsafe, you're going to ask them if they're comfortable proceeding with the survey. So I have some additional sensitive questions to ask. Is that okay? Or do you feel like answering the questions would compromise your safety? And that's totally up to them. If they say, yes, let's continue with the survey. And if not, you can end the survey right there. And we'll get into this in a bit, but participation is voluntary. It's actually on the next slide. So we need to capture everyone that's in your shelter, at a minimum, your head count and how many, basic demographic information. But if someone doesn't want to answer those other questions, if they say, I'm not comfortable answering about how long I've been homeless, or I'm not comfortable answering about disabling condition or whatever, that's up to them. So capture as much as you can, and hopefully if they're folks you already know in your shelter, there's some, rapport there and comfort with sharing information with you, but don't force anyone to give information they're not comfortable with. And if they refuse to participate, that should not result in a denial of shelter services or other assistance. Give us the bare minimum information. I know from intake that this is, a male who's 50 and, this is his demographics, and, he didn't want to take the rest of the survey. That's okay. We just need to know that that person is captured, even if you can't get all the demographics. We do ask for a person's initials in the survey. If they don't want to give their initials, you can assign fake initials for that person. And there are questions about disability status. There's a couple of different questions about whether someone has different experiences. Please just ask the questions as they're answered, and we're asking that you don't dig into like the severity or more detail about it. Just asking the questions as they're stated.
Hey, Jess.
Yes.
Sorry. We have a question that for a domestic violence shelter, if the participant was coming from an unsafe situation, but you're asking about the night before, and so they're no longer in an unsafe situation, how should folks respond?
The way it's worded, we're not asking about the night before. What we're asking about the night before is where the person was staying. So should they even be included? So were they homeless the night of the count? The question is worded in such a way that says, did you need to leave the place you were last staying? due to someone making you feel unsafe. This is self-report. So even if you know for a fact that someone was fleeing DV, this is based on self-report. So please don't change information for folks, even if you know, I don't think that's right. I mean, if you have a rapport with the person, you can certainly say, hey, I'm wondering, you told me this before and you're telling me this now. Can you just clarify your answer? But ultimately, it's the person's self-report. That's a really good question. If they say, no, but that's not true, just go forward with the questions based on their response. Unless you go ahead.
Sorry. I just want to add for folks who are old timers and have been doing this for a long time. That's what I mean by old timers, not age. But this question used to be aimed at identifying anyone who had a history of domestic violence. And the question has changed from HUD in terms of what we're collecting now to be, I think, a smarter question, which is, basically, we're trying to determine, are you homeless because you are fleeing domestic violence? Did a current fleeing episode lead to your being in shelter? So I just want to point that out for folks who have been doing this a long time. If you haven't looked very closely at this question, or if you provide training to your volunteers and you sort of have the same, words in your mind for many, many years, that this question did change a couple years ago.
Thanks, Lee. That is helpful context. All right, so let's go through. We're kind of going to recap what we just talked about, who's responsible for what, and who has to do what for the point in time count. So the housing inventory count online survey, every project that's homeless serving has to complete the survey, whether you're shelter, transitional housing, rapid, PSH, other permanent housing. Please complete the online survey, even if your program is in HMIS, because we're asking information about your project setup and all that good stuff. If you're an emergency shelter or transitional housing provider, you have to do the online survey, because everyone has to do that. Plus, you have to do the point in time count. The point in time count being how many folks were experiencing homelessness in your program the night of January 27th. And that will be using HMIS or interview forms or the mobile app, depending on what's going to work for your program and if your project passes data quality. So again, you'll be notified in advance if you're an HMIS participating program, whether we can use your HMIS data. Or maybe you can clean it up in advance of the pit count. We've had folks do that, they go back in and make sure it's clean, and we'll work with you on that. Everyone else will use the interview forms for the mobile app. All right, so next steps, November through January, we're going to confirm all of your programs, your PIT contact person, and we're going to work to identify any new or closed programs. So if you see an email from PA Homeless Count at dma-housing.com or from Sierra or from Lauren, please respond. We're trying to make sure everything we submit is accurate. In January, we will do that HMIS data quality check if you're a shelter or transitional housing provider who works in HMIS. And January 27th is the point in time count. And then February 17th, everything is due to DMA. So I'm going to, before we get to Brendan's presentation, I want to take a moment for questions. So if anyone has a question, feel free to type it in the chat. I did just select that folks can unmute themselves. So if you would rather ask it verbally, please feel free to do that. Lauren and Lee, is there anything in the chat that you would like to say verbally, just in case we have folks on the phone who may not have seen the question? Anything that you think is important that is relevant to everyone?
Sure. I will just say that Carol asked a question related to HMIS setup of a new project. And I think if there's anybody on the phone who can't see the dialogue, I will say that please let us know if you have a project that you have funding for, that you're either operating and not recording the data in HMIS, or you're waiting to start. There's folks in your community, so we definitely don't want you to have money ready to roll and not running that program because it's not set up in HMIS or any other sort of hiccup like that. So please let us know if that's a problem. Lauren suggested if you can follow up with her and Brendan, that would be helpful. And then they can follow up with Tony and the folks on the HMIS team on that. We want to make sure, especially for rapid rehousing projects, we almost exclusively use HMIS data for those projects to report the necessary data to HUD because the nature of what we have to report. There's not, those interview forms, as Jessica already stated. So HMIS, and if you're a DB program, we'll be following up with you directly because you don't enter your data in HMIS, but it'll be important that if you that we hear from you if that is the story for your project.
And I just put in the chat, if you're in the West, you can email the HMIS help desk and CC Brendan and Sierra. For those who are in the East, you would work with Lauren, and for those in the West, you would work with Sierra. And I see Angela said you can also CC Angela. So it's really helpful. We'll have folks following up. This is a very, very busy time this whole year, but it's a very busy time for the HMIS team with lots of new funding rolling in, and we don't want anything to fall through the cracks. So use those resources to follow up. Anything else that came up in the chat that we want to bring up, or should we move on?
I think we're good to move on.
Okay, great. So if you have questions, this is the email address. I'm checking this email regularly starting. We don't check it during the summer. We kind of close it down, but we're back up with the PA homeless count email address. So if you have any questions about the point in time count, please email this email, pahomelesscount@dma-housing.com. You can also call DMA's office. You will get a faster response if you email, but you can also call, leave a message, and we will get back to you very quickly. There is a point in time count website that Brendan has set up. And again, when we send this out, you'll be able to click that. The website is where we kind of post anything that we've sent out. So we'll post this PowerPoint, we'll post like the survey materials. Once those are finalized, the interview forms, anything that we've sent out, we also post it online. Alrighty, so I'm gonna pass it over to Brendan, who's gonna go over the mobile app. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and Brendan, if you have anything to share, you can share that.
All right, very good. Thanks, Jessica, for that presentation and introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the PIT Count survey webinar that we host annually. So over the past couple of years, me and Jessica have coordinated with each other to bring to the COCs the PIT Count survey through the mobile app. And now this is run through a program called Survey 123 by ArcGIS or Esri. That's the company that developed it. And really what it does is it gives us a more comprehensive and in-depth way to collect survey responses electronically. Some advantages to using the survey or the mobile app: less paper and administrative work needed on the back end. So you're not having to mess around with making sure you're not losing paper responses and then submitting these paper responses through mail and risk losing them. It also helps on the back end with the data cleanup. Once we have all these surveys collected, we generally have to submit them to HUD through an electronic document. So having this completed on the mobile app really helps with the back end cleanup as well. And it's just a lot cleaner in general. So if you are interested in using the survey through the mobile app, there's two methods that you can administer it. You can either do it on your desktop computer if you're doing it at your sheltered location. You can just pull it right up on your desktop, or you can download the Survey 123 app to your mobile device, whether that's your smartphone or a tablet, for example. Depending on which device you were using, whether it's an Apple product or an Android product, you would just go to your store, your app store, and search for Survey 123 and download that app. You won't need any logins. You don't need to create an account or anything. What you will do is you'll get a link from me that looks like this right here. So I'm just going to copy that. And what you'll do is, depending on which device you're using, you're just going to paste it into your browser. I'm assuming you can all see my screen, correct? Just give me a head nod, Jess. Thank you. But yeah, you will just post that link into your browser, and then depending on what you are using to administer the survey, you can either click to open it in your browser or click to open it in the Survey 123 app. If you are using the app, it'll download it to you. It will download right onto your phone there, so you will have easy access to it. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to show you both methods. So I'll start by showing you what it looks like in the browser, and then I'll show you what it looks like in the app, just to do two different methods. I will note that this is the original survey that I put together that incorporates both the sheltered and the unsheltered count. So come survey time, it may look a little bit different. But this is just a good general idea of what you can expect when we do it for reals. So to start off, the date and time will automatically be recorded. So you do not need to enter that. You will just enter your name and proceed with the survey. So I will say I'm completing this in the Eastern CoC. Again, you want to note that the little asterisks here, these are required fields that you must answer. Please select the county that you're in. I will say I'm in Bedford. And this will automatically, it should automatically record your location. Now, since I'm doing it, I think since I'm doing it online right now, I'm not sure why it's putting me just off the coast of Africa, but that should be working once we go live. But one major change that we made, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you can type in an address. You can
Yeah.
also skip this question. I know last year some folks had an issue with this question and they were getting hung up on it. So
Yep.
It's not required. If you want to enter it and you like know where the person was or where your shelter is, you can enter it. But if not, don't get hung up on this question.
Here, let me see if that'll, there we go. So I changed it, it should allow it. I think that's just showing maybe where one other survey was submitted, but really the benefits of having this location is at the end of the PID count, whoever has used the app, it'll create a hotspot map that'll show in our region where we're finding concentrated areas of homelessness. And really it's more helpful for the unsheltered count as opposed to the PID count or the sheltered count. But it's just a little helpful tool to for us to look at. But what I was mentioning before is one thing that we've changed in the survey this year is we kind of broke it out into different pages and sections. So it's not all one continuous survey. It's a little bit more streamlined and easier to follow this way with that we've broken it down. Excuse me. So on the next page, after we kind of collect the interviewers' demographic information, information of where they're conducting the survey, you'll get to this section, which may or may not be here for the shelter count, because this kind of goes into if you were already surveyed or not, or surveying the person you were interviewing. You'll have a little prompt here, which you'll see throughout the survey. It'll say interviewer or be highlighted in bold. And it kind of gives you a prompt that you want to read to the person you are interviewing, just to help you through the PID count. So if you ask the person, can you have 10 minutes of time? Yes, you're able to interview them. And this is, like I said, mostly for the unsheltered count to determine whether you're doing a observation survey or the full PID count. But for the sake of our demonstration, we're going to say no. The volunteer did not already ask me the question, so I may go ahead and proceed to the survey. So here again, the question will start out, where are you sleeping tonight? And this will be updated to the actual night of the PID count that we are working. But if it'll also have another like secondary prompt here where it says if you're doing it the day after the night of January 22nd or 27th, for example, it'll ask you, where did you sleep last night? So it's either where are you sleeping tonight or where are you sleeping last night? But since we are doing a sheltered count, I'm going to say that someone is staying in a emergency shelter, and it should come up that it will give you a list of names for the emergency shelters in your area. So I'm just going to select one of those and.
Can I add something, Brendan?
Yeah, go ahead.
We update that list right before the pit count. So if any programs get added or are new, we'll add that. But if for some reason you can't find your shelter transitional housing program, you can just click other and then type in the name. Maybe it's something that is new, or the name doesn't quite match. We will figure it out. Just let us know who you are.
Yep. So just for Jessica's example, I hit other, and then you can type in whatever program it is. So, okay, we'll go next. And this is the demographics page. So we'll start off by entering the number of adults in the household. I'll just hit 1, and then I hit tab to go to the next question. And this will ask for the number of children. I'll just do 1 again and hit tab. And that will take us to this section where we get more of the actual demographics. So this, you'll ask the head of household first. You always want to start with the head of the household and kind of go through the rest of the family after that. So I'll just put the initials. You'll ask, what are the initials? Are you the head of household? For this instance, yes. Now for the age, we added something a little bit different this year. We have the under 18, 18 to 18, or 18 to 24, these kind of set ranges. But if someone does have their exact age, please select that and enter the age of the person if you have the exact number. Okay, then we'll go ahead and answer the ethnicity. And now these, you can select more than one if they're these square check boxes like this, whereas opposed to the circles, you can only select one. We'll go ahead and do race. We'll do gender. Of course, you have the options for other gender responses. And then after we finish that first one, you'll see that there's a number. So there's 2 people in this household. Right here is a little 1. We got to the next one and there's a little 2. So you'll know that you have done both members of the household. We'll continue here. This is, we'll say it's a child under the age of 18. So their initials, they're not the head of household. How are they related? I will select child. Are they staying in the same location as the head of household? Yes. Age, we'll just do 12. Just kind of going through since you already saw this part and just selecting at random. So once we entered all that information, we will go to the next page. So this talks about the past sleeping history. So again, you want to put in the head of the household's initials here. And since this is more about sleeping history, you only want to ask this to the adult head of households, whether there's 1, 2, or however many, or if they are a youth under 18 and are considered a head of household as well. You don't want to ask this to any youth under the age of 18 who are not considered head of household. So here you'll ask when did they last sleep in one of these following locations: house, apartment, regardless of ownership. So we'll ask that question and solicit an answer. The next question would be, how in the past 3 years, how many different periods have you slept in an emergency shelter, DV shelter, etc. And you will record that answer. And then the final question, in the past 3 years, how many total months have you slept in a shelter, DV shelter, etc. So I'm just going to answer those questions and move on. So here's the DV question that Jessica was talking about in her side of the presentation. Make sure that you are not asking this question if there are 2 or more adults being interviewed together. So we have here the options. If when you ask a question, if they're feeling safe or not, you can answer, or if you weren't able to answer it, you can just hit did not ask due to whatever reason. But for the sake of here, I will hit yes. And then similar to how Jessica said in her portion of the interview or in her presentation, if they would like to speak to someone, you can direct them to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So that number will come up. And then here's the question: if they would like to continue or not. you can continue. So I will hit yes, and then the prompt comes up to move on to the sensitive questions, whereas you hit no, you just end the survey after that. But I will hit yes and continue on. For these sensitive topic questions, you also only want to ask those to the head of households, whether they are over 18 or youth under the age of 18, if they are the head of household. And here for the interview, it should already list the head of households, but I'm just going to put in the initials and move forward. The first question is, do you drink alcoholic beverages or use drugs? I'll just kind of go through and answer some of these questions. Do you have psychiatric or emotional conditions? Do you have a physical disability that could include something that substantially limits one or more basic physical activities? Yes. If you answered yes to any of these questions, you will get a survey question that prompts that said, do any of the situations we just discussed keep you from holding a job or living in stable housing? If they answer yes, it'll ask you kind of which one is really the one that's holding them back. Whereas if you hit no, you can just continue on through the survey. Have you been diagnosed with a developmental disability? Do you have AIDS or an HIV related illness? Do you receive disability benefits such as SSI, SSDI? And here, when we get to the final question of this section, did you serve in active duty as a member of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, etc.? If they select yes, another prompt will come up and ask if you would like the name of someone who works with veterans to provide housing resources. And if they would, you can direct them to this phone number here. Now, the last question we have is there anything else you want to tell me about your housing experience? This is just open-ended. They don't have to answer this if they don't have anything to share, but just to get a little bit more information about their lived experience is important. So once they are all done, you will just hit submit, and then you're done. So then to go back, you would, yes?
I was just going to note that the sensitive questions, if folks didn't notice this, they're marked as not required. So you should ask them, but if someone says I'm not comfortable, you can skip it and it will still let you submit the survey. You don't need to make something up. You can just skip it.
Yep. All right. So that was how it looks in the browser. Again, I'm just going to go through this next one quickly here. I'm going to open it up in the app. See if it works for me. If not, I already have it opened. Okay. So this is how it'll look on the app. It's very similar, a little different, but I'm just going to go through and quickly type some stuff in. So again, the date and time will automatically be recorded at the top, enter your name, select which CoC you're in and the county, and then we will continue on here. So again, you'll introduce yourself. Can I have 10 minutes of your time? Yes. Did someone already interview tonight? No, we will continue. So the next question is, where are you sleeping tonight? Again, you can select emergency shelter, transitional housing. Some of these options will be removed just for the sheltered count, but you will have the option to select, and then select the program that they may be staying in, and then I will continue on. Oops, I missed a page. Okay, so for this one, I will do 2 adults in the household, and I will do 0 children in the household. Collect the demographic information. Sorry, this is not scrolling down as to where I would like it. I would start with the head of household. Are the head of household? Yes. Age, exact age is known. Again, if they know it, please put that in here. As the ethnicity, race, and then gender. Okay. Sorry, I keep hitting buttons that I shouldn't be hitting. So then what this is a little bit different on the app as opposed to the browser. Before it was numbered in the top right corner of the questions, whereas on the app, you'll see this little box here at the bottom of the question that says 1 of 2. So to go to the next section, you'll just hit this little arrow and then it'll be the same thing. That's just how you have to do it through the app as opposed to the browser. So we'll just do, are you the head of household? No. How are you related? Well, for this section, I will do non-married partner. Age, ethnicity, race, gender answered, and continue on. So since we did do 2 adults, we will have to answer these questions twice. So I will start with the head of household TT and go through and ask and answer these questions. And then since there is another head of household here, I will have to go and do the second person, or not head of household, but adult member. So I will go through and answer the questions for them and continue on. Since there were 2 adults here in this household, I will not ask this question and continue on. And then we will answer, or for the sake, I guess, for this one, just so we can wrap this one up, we will not continue on with this portion of the survey, and we will go ahead and submit. Now, one benefit that, sorry, let me just looking at this yet. I don't know what this is saying to me, but I will look at that another time. What I was going to mention though is I actually lost it. Oh, with the app, one benefit is if you are doing an unsheltered count, which the West is moving forward with doing an unsheltered count in some areas. If you are out in the field and you happen to not have service at the time of delivering a survey, you can hit the check mark to submit. And typically it'll ask you if you want to submit now or save for later. So if you don't have service and you cannot send at that time, you can save the survey. And then when you have service, you can go back into the app, find the surveys that you have basically saved as a draft, and then submit them at a later time, which is one helpful thing about using the app. But really, that's all I have to share at this point about the Survey 123 PIT app. Are there any questions for me in the chat, Jessica or Lauren?
I don't see any questions.
Okay.
And I haven't seen any other questions come back in. So we will probably go ahead and wrap up early. Always nice surprise. But I can stay on for a couple of minutes. If anyone has questions that they didn't get to answer, feel free to stay on and we can talk through any questions that you have. Otherwise, you can email us at pahomelesscount@dma-housing.com, or you can always reach out to Lauren in the East or Sierra in the West if you have any questions. You will be hearing from us. The next steps you will be hearing from us is we will provide all sheltered programs with the link to the online HIC survey. That'll happen in January. For the PIT count, we'll be providing you with the paper interview forms as well as the online survey link as we get a little bit closer. We will also provide you with a PowerPoint. So maybe you're not the person at your shelter or transitional housing program who actually does the surveys, it's somebody else. We will send you a brief PowerPoint that you can share with your teammates, whoever's doing it. If they weren't able to be on this webinar, it kind of goes through more logistics about the survey. So we will be sending that out. So please just be aware of your emails that are coming through because generally we're sending out emails that have resources or information. Thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. We'll go ahead and wrap up, but if anyone has questions, feel free to stay on. last call for questions. And if you don't have questions, you're welcome to hop off. Thanks again for your time.